Good evening. Good evening. I am back on another Wednesday wine wisdom. Switch this around, turn the music down just a hair, and there we go. Welcome to another fun Wednesday. We're going to be talking about Cabernet Sauvignon today. We're going to go through just a little bit of kind of interesting factoids when it comes to what they call the king of red wine varietals, Cabernet Sauvignon. Um, I think one interesting fact that I like to share about Cabernet is it's not my favorite. It's really not. While there's some great qualities to every single wine, it's not particularly my favorite. I mean, it's by far the most selling, most planted, produced varietal, at least California, probably the United States, and probably um, all over the world if you take into some of the areas. Then I'll get into a little bit of details and really focus about California and US when it comes to Cabernet. But really, the origin is, I think, the most interesting part about Cabernet is the parent varietals that make up Cabernet Sauvignon. It's actually, um, hold on. Huh? 8:15. Sorry, consulting schedules. So the parentage of Cabernet Sauvignon, most interestingly enough, um, it was the parent. Hayes says to shut up. She can hear you. She says, "Suck it, Hayes." Okay, so Cabernet Sauvignon. The parent varieties are actually Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc. Most interesting enough, it was bred in like the 1700s with those two varietals to put together Cabernet Sauvignon. Why they did it? It's kind of a mystery. That's kind of the fun part about it. And it wasn't actually proven genetically until like the mid 1990s by UC Davis. They actually went back and genetically tested and found all the different markers on the genome of Cabernet Sauvignon that matched the white variety Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc. So if you like the aspects of Cabernet Sauvignon, it's also very interesting to go out and try and find some Cabernet Francs. And it has some of the great, rich, round, red fruit and tannic qualities that you like, and that it makes it. And I think what helped give Cabernet its um, essence to it in terms of its tannin structure is that crossing with Sauvignon Blanc, giving it some of the other thiols and the grassy notes, which as we ripen that fruit diminish. But it also I think softens kind of that harsh tannic quality that Cabernet Franc can have if you ever have. Maybe we'll get into that in another episode. So that's kind of the baseline lineage. It's actually 1996 that UC Davis researchers figured that out. Just going through my notes. Um, and I think one of the other interesting aspects of Cabernet is, I think they crossed it with Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc to kind of help it be a little bit more weather tolerant, be a little bit more resistant, have thicker skins, and also be a little bit less harsh tannic when it comes out of the wine. So it trying to give it a little more uh, robust growing features as well as palatability aspects um, when it comes to the final wine product. And then using that as a base wine for some of these areas like in Bordeaux where different areas proprietarily use less or more Cabernet Sauvignon versus Merlot. There's a whole argument there. If you look at the map of Bordeaux, it's cut in the middle by a river. I forget the name of it. Something French, obviously. Um, that river, there's a left and right bank, and viticulturists and winemakers back in the good old days in Bordeaux decided that on the left bank, Cabernet Sauvignon did better because of the soils and the climate that's on that side versus the right bank, which is more Merlot focused. I believe I'm having that correctly. It might be the other way around. I always forget that which one's left, which one's right. Um, and that was, those are the approved varietals there: Cabernet, Merlot, uh, Malbec, Cab Franc. Um, there's some other red varieties and red Bordeaux that you can create those Bordeaux blends off of. And I'm going to get into a Bordeaux blend in a future episode. I have some really interesting wines to try from that. Um, that I have a couple of bottles of, and I'm going to get a couple more to really play with because I think they're quite interesting in terms of the differences between that left and right side, even at a cheap or cheaper level. Um, and as you move forward into more modern times and Cabernet production, the chateaus in France, they've kind of done what they've done for a millennia, crafting these really beautiful, opulent wines. And as you get into the 1970s, a English wine connoisseur slash um, uh, business owner decided to come out to California and hear about, what they were doing in Sonoma and Napa, and traveled around and tasted wines from those areas. And these Cabernets that were coming out of those areas were fantastic. And he decided to organize what became known as the Judgment of Paris. It's kind of one of the most historical aspects that put California on the wine map, and overshadowed some of these legacy French Bordeaux's. There's a fantastic movie about it. It's called Bottle Shock. I would look it up. Chris Pine's in it. Uh, uh, Pullman, Jeff Pullman? No, one of the other actors in there. It's a showcase of Chateau Montelena, very, very famous Napa producer there that got put on the map for their Chardonnay. Um, but in that same judgment, some wines from that comparative vintage, from Stag's Leap in Napa Valley, came up against some of the top Bordeaux chateaus uh, from similar vintage years, and completely overshadowed in terms of the ripeness, the quality of the wine, the cleanness of them, and the people who were judging basically outscored all of these California wines higher than the French ones, and people were completely shocked that that could happen. They didn't think that the you know redneck Americans out in California could produce these wines that had nuance and flavor and structure, and they're so much cleaner in terms of their application when it comes to the production of the wine. That really put California on the map, and then it's been gangbusters in growth ever since. We basically move into modern times. I'm gonna whip out some facts for y'all because I think it's pretty interesting. Uh, so in the top 10 areas of California counties that produce Cabernet, and summaried up into the 2019 vintage, Napa County actually produced about 22,000 acres of Cabernet. San Luis Obispo County, or Paso Robles for lack of better terms, about 15,000. Sonoma County is about 12. San Joaquin County was another 12 and change. Monterey County has 5. Sacramento County, which is like Lodi essentially, is about 5,000 acres. So that's modern time. In totality, the overall Cabernet production last year in 2020 was about 500,000 tons of Cabernet Sauvignon was sold and reported to the USDA, and they put out a grape report every year, basically on every single varietal that is logged in by a winery that has a bond, as we have to report on these aspects, in terms of how many tons we're producing, what the weight of it was, what the sugar content was, and all that stuff is wrapped up, as well as what price we paid for it, and all those things are wrapped up. Sorry, my dog just like caught me by surprise right here. Sorry, I'm sitting right here. so that's the kind of broad overview of Cabernet. Just some other details I'm going to get into about production stuff. But what we are drinking tonight is Josh Cabernet. This lighting gets all the glare. Josh Cabernet, 2018, it's California appellated wine. And then Justin, a Paso appellated Cabernet, also 2018. This is all Paso fruit in that, or at least most of it, at least 85%, as far as I know. I actually have the Josh in my glass right now. You know, it's good. Not great. It's good though. Okay, so there's a 500,000 tons of Cabernet that were crushed last year. It's actually down about 80,000 tons from 2019. So a significant percentage lower, probably because of the ginormous fires that ravaged all of California last year, as everyone noticed or heard about in some aspect, burning, you know, near a million acres of land at a certain point, which has an effect on the wine. I'll probably have to do a whole smoke taint episode because I think that's a pretty interesting topical topic. When it comes to wine production. But getting into the production of Cabernet, and as I mentioned earlier, it is a hardy, thick-skinned variety that has, the ability to be very concentrated, very tannic, depending on your extraction methods. And that's kind of what I want to talk about in comparison to these two wines, between the Josh and the Justin. And then even relating that into maybe even higher end Cabernets out of Napa Valley or even French Bordeaux's, and some of the extraction method and modalities. I've had a little bit of experience playing with some pretty high end fruit in prior life, and it is a very interesting beast on the upper echelon of that. And how I approach it when I'm actually making a Cabernet is I want to extract out all the good aspects without being so bitter and harsh. I want to pull out all the good, like bitter, um, all that like bittersweet chocolate aspect, and not that bitter, harsh, like mouth drying but like disgusting tannic aspect. And we do that through looking at how the seeds and skins are developing in the field. It's literally the most important part is knowing and understanding the concentration of that fruit before it gets into the winery. And you do that by actually going out, tasting seeds and skins, and actually grinding them up in your mouth and tasting it. Is it super green, vegetal tasting seeds, or is it crunchy, kind of smoked almond seeds? And that's kind of the sweet spot. And then there's the other side where it's so harsh and tannic, it's so bitter that you can't taste anything. There's not enough sweetness in there to even to overpower that bitterness. And that's when you know it's at least it's too concentrated, or it's maybe too dehydrated, not have enough liquid volume in there to kind of compensate for that bitterness. So you want the ripeness and the flavor of the juice and the pulp to be nice, but you also want the skin tannins and the seed tannins to have that grip and almost like that very fine sandpaper feeling, because you can kind of estimate that depending on your extraction methods in the winery, that's kind of going to be the end point. Because most of those skin tannins are going to be some of the first to be leached out. The seed tannins are going to be later, and then hopefully you can restrict that in your pressing cycle and your fermentation and extended maceration if you're doing that. And so one of the big differences that I find in the Josh and Justin Cabernet is that very difference. The Josh Cabernet, being a very large brand, probably upwards of a couple million cases of that are produced every vintage. I mean, I can say that with a relative amount of certainty because I particularly know a lot about that brand. Wink, wink. I don't make it, but I make it. For lack of a better term, I have a deep insight there. And then when it comes to something like the Justin Cabernet, I mean, that is a a relatively smaller brand, but a huge growth brand. And I chose these two because these wines are these growth brands that have just done so well in the marketplace because they are great wines and they do really well in the price points. That Josh Cabernet is about 12, 13, maybe $14 depending on your region that you're in, which I think is a very solid price point for it. And the Justin's probably about 25. Hayes, you need to back off the Alabama twang. I can't understand your typing. Um, but the Justin Cabernet, being that's El Paso fruit, they've really done a very interesting job of growing that brand and being having a very unique style. Not that other people aren't doing similar styles, but they have their own touch to it when it comes to extraction and fruitiness and that tannin and softness through the aging process. And that's what I've always really enjoyed about it is that it has this almost like cocoa powder finish to it. And I've always noticed that in the wines. The fruit's always been very ripe and full, and uh, it kind of ebbs and flows, being super dark purple fruit or bright red fruit or a mix of the two. They definitely have it ebbs and flows with the seasons as Mother Nature plays the biggest impact on that. Um, but through the aging process, and they're barrel aging the majority of that wine, I presume still to this date they're probably doing some other oak extraction methods on some of the volume to compensate for the growth they're probably seeing at this point. But they have that concentrated cocoa powder aspect to the finish of the wine. I need to get to it because I want to try some more of it. Hold on. Excuse me while I pour. Oop, almost dropped that. One of the biggest differences, at least to start off, between Joss, I could have some friends over. You do live down the street, and I have two open bottles of wine. Doors open. Um, but seriously, I could use some help drinking this. Send Matt down. We can give you some to-go cups or something. The uh, the one big difference, at least from these two wines, one being that one is mostly, if not all, made from Paso Robles fruit versus the Josh, which has some Paso Robles in there. It's probably a lot of other areas like Lodi and some of the other interior areas of California that are outside of the AVA system, and it helps kind of balance the cost perspective for what they're looking to produce for that 12 to $14 range. While the Cabernet being all from Paso Robles, and they're probably picking fruit from the west side, the east side, all the way down into Creston, all the way out into the almost probably Santa Maria. They could be even playing with some Monterey fruit. They have some Appalachian room to play within, about 15%, non-Paso Robles appellate in there, so they could be playing with a little bit of Lodi or maybe some other varietals to balance out their. I thought I pulled up the full thing. I did. They don't really give you a good breakdown if there's other varietals in there. Some producers will do that. They'll actually tell you how much percent of maybe Petit Syrah, Petit Verdot, maybe Zinfandel, maybe something else fun in there. If they're playing with some Malbec, they might give you that deep breakdown. I know someone like Jay Lore, they're very good about giving you that in-depth breakdown. Robert Hall does it too. They want to kind of give you all that flush information. Hayes, your question. It's not weird that you can taste Paso in a lot of Paso wines. It's farmy or earthy. I think those are fine adjectives. I think there is I mean, that's what they call terroir. It's that sense of place in a wine. Um, I can definitely taste the difference between a Paso Robles Cabernet and Napa Cabernet and even a Sonoma Cabernet. I mean, Sonoma Cabernets, they have a almost black olive character to them. Most do at least. They have that little, I wouldn't call it briny, but it's that background of of thiols and or pyrazines in the makeup of that genetics of that wine, like I got to, that the fact that it's a cross between Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc. Some of these grassy notes are very much a part of the character of Cabernet Sauvignon. As a Cabernet Sauvignon ripens in the early stages, as you're in the barrel development stage, it's so like bell pepper, green bean in flavor, because it has a high molecular content of what they call a pyrazine, um, and that has that bell pepper aromatic. As that fruit ripens and gets to a point where you're going to pick it for production, it's kind of standard. We definitely can do a 3 area blind tasting because I think that'd be really fun. Maybe future episodes we can do a little wine tasting party with some other people and really uh, get an interesting vibe going there, because there's so much interesting aspects when it comes to the different areas and even different production styles. Not that there's that much difference, but you have to approach the ones a little bit differently when it comes to the tannin management, um, especially on Cabernet. Um, and so going kind of circling back to the pyrazinic aspect, I find Cabernet from Paso to be very lacking in that because it's such a warm climate. It's a much more warm climate in terms of uh, high temperatures day over day in Paso Robles, even in the far reaches of the hilly coastal west side. That helps burn off those pyrazinic compounds, and it helps develop that riper fruit. It helps develop the tannins in a different way, usually faster than somewhere like Napa Valley. Not to say that they can't do it. Paso Robles averages a lot higher seasonal high temperatures, but they have about the same night temperatures. So there's a larger diurnal shift of temperature in Paso Robles on average. Some years are different. Last year, not so much. I mean, it was 110 in Paso when I was driving through, going to the coast. It was just as hot as it was in Central Valley, where I live, and it was, you know, brutal. And that's hard on any grape, regardless of where it's at. Napa, Sonoma. Not that it ever gets that warm in Sonoma, but I guess that year it did. Um, and I think that that climate, that hot, very consistently hot, arid, dry temperature in Paso Robles really helps develop that richer, riper style. Helps develop the color, the taste, the Paso taste. That's very different than Napa and very different than Sonoma and very different from even somewhere like Lodi. Even though even Lodi and Paso generally have about the same daytime temperatures almost yearly. If you look at day by day in those two areas, Paso proper and Lodi proper, they're always about the same. It's very interesting. Just the nighttime temperatures are different because of that coastal influence. So some of the grape qualities can actually be fairly similar in those areas, but Paso generally just shines a little bit better in some areas. And then when you get to the higher end, there's a wider gap in terms of viticultural practices and wine quality. Um, so kind of moving into the kind of final stages of after you pick the fruit, you get it fermenting. One aspect of thinking about Cabernet is making sure that the once it's done fermenting, that you're monitoring that acclimation of tannins that you're extracting from the seeds and skins, because you're fermenting red wines on the skins to extract all that color and tannin, because that's what gives it all of its body and weight, color, and good things that we enjoy about it. And then in that alcohol latent solution that you just created through fermentation, it's now better at extracting those tannins from the seeds and skins, and you have to be very cognizant of, managing that extraction through temperature, through pressing decisions. And one thing that I learned about working at a higher end wine production facility up in Sonoma that was crushing Napa Valley fruit was that the decisions on those wines are actually very important for the longevity of the wine in terms of the aging properties. Um, they're also in that realm. We're also working in about a $250 to $300 bottle of wine in the end all be all. And the biggest driver of that is the fact that um, that wine's going to be cellared and aged in the wine in a barrel for at least 2 to 3 years, then sit in bottle for another year and change, and then someone's probably going to hold on to it for even more years. So that wine's going to go through a very long life cycle of aging, developing those tannins, and really from that pressing cycle, you have such a huge amount of these tannin molecules that are so rough and jagged and sharp is a great descriptor I like to use. They're so sharp that they need all this time in a barrel and time to combine and build into larger, softer, rounder molecules, and it takes many, many months and or many, many years to get that cycle completed because it has such a huge concentration. It takes a while for all these little pieces to slowly just bind together and build these larger plush molecules, which are very lovely to taste and great to pair with food. But fresh off the press, that you take one sip and it's fruity and delicious and big and round, but it also just takes all the saliva out of your mouth. It just dries it all straight out. It's very interesting to do from a tasting thing that no one ever gets to see other than the winemakers or people who work in wineries. But if there's a way to capture that in some small essence and be able to show someone, they would fully understand why you have to do all these different things and add all these costs of high-end barrels and time and aging, because they would see like this is not ready. This needs something. This needs help, and it's through that aging process. Something like the Justin Cabernet that actually spends probably about a year. I think this 2018 was about they say 13 months aged in American oak. It's about 25% new barrel. Helps kind of that those decisions help build that wine out. And for even higher end wines, they'll set even longer, so you need more time to drive that reaction through the slow cellar temperature of about 55 to 58 degrees Fahrenheit, to control the microbial population, to control that aging process, to give you that low, slow, very Texas barbecue style aging process. Matt, you said, would a winery ever move dirt from one region to other? Is that a logistical nightmare? It's not worth it. The dirts are very abundantly different. If you had 40 acres of land, you could have 5 different soil types in that same area, depending on where you're at. Um, it's actually a very interesting thing, but I was actually just looking at a aerial uh, capture system that basically flies over a vineyard and takes imagery of a vineyard using different light, temperature, and um, visual pictures, extrapolates that into what's happening at the vine level, to show you water stress, to show you um, highs and lows of temperature, to show vine health, some kind of cool um, aspects using technology to um, give you an in-depth look of the light spectrum that's happening in your field, in your block, in your varietal. Um, to even look for pests, to even look for leaks in a water line that could be cooling that area down and creating too much canopy or the amount of leaf or foliage that's on that particular area of vineyard that could decrease the quality, and you can fix that. But it's in there's an overlay on these maps that show you all the different standards, the soil types that are known in that area and where they move throughout an area in a field, and they could be wildly different within very small plots of land. You can have three little different fingers of different types of soil converging on itself because of the way the planet shifted in that particular spot. Some other areas are less robust in soil type, the Central Valley probably being one of them, but even then, there's a lot of difference as you get closer to rivers versus farther away from them, the difference. And then mostly really does come down to your growing practices, the input you put into a vineyard, an orchard, or whatever you're growing. It really comes down to knowing what you're doing and applying it correctly to what you're growing, where you're growing it, to grow the best crop for whatever you are growing. And in grapes perspective, it's managing water, it's managing nutrients, managing pests. Pests are huge. It's managing timing of your watering cycles. It's managing uh, application of these nutrients to best get into the vine at the proper times of the phenological development of those berries to give them the best shot without jacking the vine up with a bunch of green foliage that's going to take away nutrients from putting it into the fruit, which you want the vine to focus its heart and soul into versus growth. Growing a bunch of appendages that have no purpose other than catching light and creating more internal energy for the plant, while good for the plant, is not great for the fruit. It's a matter of priority. The vine has stress. If it has just that little bit of grind to it, it focuses on its lineage, which is the fruit, because it has the seeds that can grow more of itself, the plant. And you want to just always be kind of grinding down on the vines to just never make it so happy it's just going to go wild and do what it wants. You want it to focus on developing the fruit and concentrating its energy on that versus the growth cycle. And that's what a lot of the people throughout Paso, Napa, Sonoma, they focus on really tamping down all the different aspects to put all of that vine's energy into the fruit, which can give you great wines like this Justin or Josh or any of these other Napa Sonoma producers. They're very tuned into that aspect of the growing side, which is essentially what makes the wine the wine. Us as winemakers are just trying to extract all the stuff they put into that vine at that point. So that kind of leads me into my next uh, kind of segue into kind of final aging and finishing differences between Justin and Josh. Justin, as I said, was barrel aged. They say 13 months in new oak for 25% new barrel equivalent. So essentially, the total volume, 25% of it, was in a fresh new barrel has never seen wine before. While something like Josh was never seen in a barrel at all. 100% that wine has never been in a barrel. I can basically damn near guarantee you that. Maybe 1%. I'll give them 1%. But they use oak adjuncts or oak chips, staves, or the mix of the two to give you some of these aromatic attributes that they give you those attributes of oak and uplift the fruit, add some more tannin aspects that help round out the natural wine tannins that are in there. And by all means, I love oak adjuncts because you can really dial in the exact attributes you really want. I've always found Josh to be very spicy. It has just a light touch of vanilla, but very subtle, very opulent and subtle in terms of its oak impact. And I think that's a fantastic way to go about um, uh, pushing that oak influence in there. I can only imagine they want that fruit to be the first attribute to it, which is very true. It's very true when you smell the wine and taste the wine because it is you're tasting fruit, you're tasting that ripeness, that raspberry, cherry, maybe a little bit of plum in terms of aromatics, and it tastes very delicious. But it has this kind of soft um, toasted oak, toasted vanilla, and spiciness to it, versus something like the Justin that has a much rounder, concentrated effect of oak from actually being in a barrel for that 13 months, which adds to that concentration of the wine through the natural permeation of water through the barrel and evaporation that slowly concentrates that wine over those 13 months, and that takes that wine to another leap, and that's why you're paying $25 for or $20 for Justin versus 12 for Josh, um, even though they could probably sell for the same price. One could move up, one could move down. The end all margins on those wines probably wouldn't make sense. Justin couldn't go down because they want to, keep a healthy brand growing, and they produce a wine that totally justifies $20 to $25. I think they could charge more. I mean, that wine is it's always fantastic. It's always a hit when you're having a meal. It everything about the smell of it is right where you want a Cabernet Sauvignon to be. The Josh has a couple holes um, in the structure and body and aromatics of it. It's a little lean on the tannin. It's a little lean on the finish. Kind of just falls away. Um, but that's to say it's not terrible or bad for it. It just doesn't have the opulence and roundness and fullness to something in comparison to the Justin. And as you move up even into $40 and $50 and $100 and above that, it's all just grape costs and time that they have to recoup. And even then, they want to make sure they make all the money off. But once you get about $50+ you find that all those gaps and holes are filled with something that's just jam packed with all the different flavor markers of fruit aromatics to oak aromatics to even tertiary aspects of earthiness and terroir, as we were talking about earlier. And then even on the palate, you can taste that full, lush, round structure and body of the tannin that's been so developed over a long period of time on these really, really nice wines that it has this broad palate range that swells like a wave. It comes in real slow and starts to peak, and then it crests over. But it doesn't just stop there. It doesn't just fall off and disappear. It rolls out and pushes, and that's what makes higher end Cabernets have that aspect of coming back for another glass and pairing that with food that makes it that adds to it, something that's grilled. Even something like pizza is really great with Cabernet. I mean, this Justin Cabernet, you can throw pizza at that all day and it's going to be fantastic, especially like a wood-fired pizza would be really, really good with that. Gosh, I mean, you can think of pasta dishes that would be great because of the spice and the acid. It can kind of pair well with it. Um, yeah, and that's kind of the fun aspects of these, you know, kind of two different aspects of Cabernet and these two different producers that are producing two different two different wines, but the same variety from completely two different areas and having two different mindsets and end goals and where they want to be and who they want to be selling to and for what reason. Um, you know, like I said, Josh, that Cabernet is a million cases, if not more. It's being sold at every liquor store, every convenience store, every wine shop that's not high end, being very selective on what they're doing, but every retailer has Josh Cabernet in it across the United States. and good for them. They've done a fantastic job of developing a brand that's at this price point that you can go to every day for $15 or $12, $14, whatever it is, and get a great wine and enjoy that. But if I had my choice, I'd be pulling the Justin almost every time. It is that has that Paso vibe, as we were talking about, Hayes. It has that. I like to think of Paso as like kind of the farm town holdout in the Central Coast, where there's a lot of very old school farmer types that you know they're old school. They do things that their grandfathers used to do, and I think that has a touch on the wines that gives it this dusty, rustic quality to some of these wines. Even other producers that have fancy new wineries that are, they're very squeaky clean. They're very modern in their architecture and all these different things. Their Cabernets still have that inner core, and that comes down to that terroir and that area of Paso that I think can grow even better wines in Napa Valley, in my personal opinion. There's probably a couple people that can grow fruit as well or better, but I think on the average for what you're buying, you can go to Paso and get a knockout bottle of Cabernet for 25, 30, maybe spend $40, sometimes 50, but never goes much over that. Some people will charge more because they're doing their own thing. But from a baseline perspective, Napa cabs are gonna, from any of the more prestigious houses that are doing small lot production, they're gonna be $50 to kind of start. And I think that's unfair to you, the consumer, to not have that option. And I think people need to migrate more to Paso Robles because of that. Not to say that there's not great wines in Napa Valley. There definitely are. No balk on them for what they're doing, but bang for your buck, the Justin Cabernet is definitely a very nice one. Yeah, you know, I think I've talked enough about Cabernet for a day. It's actually pretty warm. It's a warm day here in California. Get the fan blowing above me. Gotta turn on the AC some more. It's quite warm. Um, but yeah, I got nothing else for y'all. I mean, I can keep going. Not particularly going to. Um, One thing I want to say, kind of moving forward, is the the structure I want to try and lay out for this stream is be doing some Friday but really touch maybe deeper on some other aspects as well, like we mentioned with comparative tasting between multiple areas, maybe Europe, um, maybe throw some Southern Hemisphere wines as well. It's a good place to start, but also get into some more geeky nuance side of it all, especially as there is some aspects I kind of glean over. So I'll definitely be doing that. But I'm gonna play with it, and any feedback is most welcome. And I thank you all for watching. And I'm gonna play some video games now and continue talking. Hopefully not too annoyingly. Get all the stuff off my screen.